Hey, everybody. Welcome today to our second part in this 4-part series hosted by the Shift Spot and moderated by our expert, Mike O'Neill. Today, we're talking about leading across generations and navigating the multi-generational workplace. I'm going to go ahead and share my screen and we're going to get started and dive right in. All right, so this is a 4-part series, Winning the Talent Game, Practical Tips for Attraction, Hiring, and Retention in a Changing Landscape. We are on part 2. This is sponsored by the Shift Spot. Well, if you were here last week, you were here to know that we went over effective strategies for talent acquisition and retention. It was an amazing session. If for any reason you did not get to attend and you would like the follow-up, you can email winter@theshiftspot.com and I can get you all of the follow-up and slide deck and everything that we went over. Today, we're on part 2, navigating the multi-generational workplace. And again, this event is hosted by the Shift Spot. Who we are and what we do is we are a CEO coaching and peer advisory community. We have found that sometimes business owners suffer silently and they don't have one person that can help them on every aspect of their CEO journey. So we put all of those people who can help on a CEO journey into a community. And why community? It's because it's the fastest way to navigate rapid change. It's the fastest way to build new practices. And it's the fastest way to pursue results and transformation. We love to say here, shift happens, we can help. And we just like to have a good time when we're at the Shift Spot. Who am I? I'm one of your hosts. I like to think that I've got a pretty cool resume. My coolest thing about me, though, is my name is Winter. I have a sister named Summer and a cousin named Autumn. Here's Ken Paskins. He's another one of your hosts today. And I always think I've got a really great resume until I take a look at his. And then when we go a little bit further and take a look at Mike's, everybody's got a better resume than me. Ken's biggest and most proud contribution to the world is that he is a proud father of 3 daughters. And our why for doing this event is so that we can help you find freedom in your business faster. A lot of times with business owners, we hear things like, I know something is not working in my business. I just can't figure out what it is. Well, what we do is we kind of compile a whole bunch of different aspects to help you figure that out, help you navigate the top problems that a CEO business owner experiences so that you can start to get the freedom and balance that you deserve. And if you stay for the whole event, that we are going to give a give back gift. I'll tell you that at the end. And you will also have the ability to be hot seated. And that is only for live attendees. So if you miss these events live, you do not have the opportunity to have one of those 2 things. All right, this is a small recap of what we're going to be covering today. And without further ado, I'm super excited to welcome our host, Mike O'Neill. He has got 30 years experience in SMB and Fortune 500 companies. He has got a very impressive resume and also a proud father of 3 sons. And so I'm going to let you explain your resume because you could probably do it a little bit better than me. So everybody welcome Mike. Mike, why don't you tell us a little bit about yourself?
Well, hello, everybody. I'm glad you have joined us. I'll keep this very brief. I come out of a corporate HR background, so I really understand how companies grow and some of the challenges when you are growing. I had the good fortune to go to work for a small company that kept growing and growing, and it grew to Fortune 500 size. That's an animal in of itself. More often than not, I choose to work with small to mid-sized businesses, particularly business owners, CEOs, as they are struggling with the same type of issues. My hope that you will find on our time together here is we're in this together as leaders. We need to be in a position through community to be able to share some of the challenges we face. That's one thing I'm really drawn to the Shift Spot, is that it recognizes when you are leading an organization, it's tough, but it's also potentially lonely. You're not alone. And what I hope you're going to find over the course of these 4 weeks is the issues you're probably facing are the same issues that others face, and hopefully we can learn and grow together.
That's right. That's right. And that you couldn't have said it better. It is often lonely at the top for some of these owners. And that's why we kind of rally together and support one another along the way. So I'm super excited about this topic today personally, because Mike, you and I talked when we were initially getting together about how, understanding the multi-generational landscape helps you in every aspect of what we do. It helps in sales, it helps in people management, it helps, it really just helps bridge the gap. And you don't know what you don't know. And once you find out this information, I've used it and it completely transforms how people interact with you. So I'm going to let you dive into your genius zone here and help walk us through this.
Winter, when we're talking about what might be the things that we key in on choosing a multi-generational landscape as a topic, how do you manage multiple generations? At first glance, you may say, why do we choose that? Well, we chose it in large part because that is one of the questions I oftentimes hear from business owners and leaders. And it goes something like this. I'm of the generation of X, but boy, these people I'm bringing in now, they're wired differently. And I'm not quite sure what I'm supposed to be doing. How am I supposed to doing it? And what I have to be able to kind of assure them is, there now are up to 5 generations in the workplace. That's staggering. And you kind of say, well, what are you talking about? I know about our boomers, and I know about millennials. What are the 5? So let me real quickly kind of point out what those 5 are, so we kind of have a context for the conversation we're going to have today. The first is those folks who were born before 1946. Oftentimes they're referred to as traditionalist. Some have even referred to them as the silent generation. Why? Because they're known for their strong work ethic, they're loyal, they respect authority, but they are only representative of about 2% of the workforce. But if you have folks who fit that description in your workforce, you need to be aware of them, though it's a shrinking number for obvious reasons. The next group is baby boomers. These are roughly 25% of the workforce today. These are folks who were born between 1946 and 1964. And like traditionalists, they're oftentimes known for their strong work ethic, career ambition. They're really dedicated. But when you begin thinking about baby boomers, and we'll talk about this a little bit later on, you need to be mindful of they prefer to communicate more face-to-face, and they prefer more structure. And
might I add with this one, they really like printouts. They like paper, right? Don't the baby boomers like to have like physical paper handed to them? And they don't like emails and technology as well, right?
I think that's a very apt description. If you were to look at the paper consumption by generation, it's going to be much higher for the boomers. That's a pretty astute observation. Another group that I almost kind of consider more the silent generation is what's called Generation X. Why? People kind of forget about them, but they represent about a third, 33% of the workforce. These are folks who were born between 1965 and 1980. And
personally, my favorite generation. I don't know how they say that the generation is silent because but this is the best generation if we're asking me.
Now, why do you say that, Winter?
Oh, I'm just kidding because I'm in this generation.
Okay, I got you. Well, then most definitely it is in the best generation. But what we need to be mindful of, for those, and again, as I'm describing this, and as we talk today, I don't want to give you the impression that if you are of a certain generation, you exactly fit this. What I'm describing now are general trends. What we need to be mindful of, I'm going to take a little bit of a side. When we're talking about generations, what we're really talking about is these are people who were born during the same window of time, and they've experienced similar things. And if you step back and you look at what they've experienced, it oftentimes has influence on that generation. As we're talking about the Gen Xers, they are known for being independent, adaptable, they're resourceful. They have grown up when there has been incredible economic and social change. And as a result, what they're going to be paying attention to, more so than some of the other generations, is that work-life balance and flexibility is important. Why? Because many of them experience just the hardships of divorces, growing up in single parent families. They might have been latch key kids. And so they've kind of gone into workforce and basically said, you know what, it was tough growing up. I want to try to break that. And so when you begin thinking about folks and what they may have experienced, there's a lot happened between 1981 and 1996. And we need to be mindful of that. But here's what they're looking for. They're looking for you, the leader, you, the owner. They're looking for transparency. They need and seek out feedback, and they want to have a sense that what you're doing as a business, it kind of has a higher purpose. Nothing wrong with making a profit, but is there something your organization does that kind of helps define the culture? There are two more I want to kind of mention. The millennials. Millennials, that's the one that I kind of heard a lot, particularly when I was in corporate HR. Who are these millennials, sometimes known as Generation Y? They represent right now the largest percentage of the U.S. workforce. Now, again, I'm offering some generalized observations, but millennials, boy, they are tech savvy. And it's really interesting. There is a strong entrepreneurial spirit amongst millennials, and they too value work-life integration. But this is the generation that you begin hearing more out of the importance of diversity and inclusion, and that they want to be able to grow personally. So
Also
I kind of,
right.
pardon?
It's also balance, right? They're not willing to grind as much as other generations, right? You know, they would rather work, not to say that they're lazy, but 30 hours a week and have more balance and actually make less money even, but be happy.
You know, it's interesting. We've seen this come through, particularly as a result of COVID. And that is, as business owners, some businesses did not have the luxury of work from home. Manufacturers in particular, people had to come to work. They had to kind of muscle through all that. Many businesses kind of found themselves adopting work from home and have moved more towards kind of a hybrid approach to that. As we're talking about these different generations, I didn't mention Generation Z. I didn't mention because they're not important. They right now only represent about 5% of the workforce, but these are the folks that we are having to deal with now. They're coming in. These are folks that oftentimes referred to as digital natives. They literally were born in a phone was probably put in their hands. Technology, it's just what they know. But they in particular, they're looking for authenticity. If you're a business owner, you're a leader, what they're looking from you and from your leadership team is be real, be mindful that they have choices. They love the idea of a flexible work environment. Ken, I think this, the point you just made, and I think I mentioned this last time, something that they're starting to find is this return to work. What they're finding is employees are putting more emphasis, not so much on what days they work, but when in the day do they work. They want that flexibility. Think about the Generation Zs. They're young, they've got life outside of work, and they want to go spend time with friends after work. And so they're looking for that flexibility. They're looking for,
Yeah, so Mike, all three of my daughters are a Gen Z. And actually, the one thing that I've heard also about this group is they are one of the closest to the baby boomers or whatever the generation is prior to that than any other. And I'm curious in your opinion of that. And I've heard that because if you look at the times that they grew up, a lot of them, it was the housing crisis, it was right after 9/11, it was after all of that stuff. And those were traumatic experiences, and they saw their friends and lose homes, and their friends lose home, and dad's unemployed and everything. So they actually grew up, a little tougher times than the millennials. So I've heard that their work ethic and everything is quite strong. Any thoughts on that?
Yeah, actually, I've heard the same thing. That's an interesting way you say that, Ken. They have a high work ethic, but at the same time, they're looking to us. They're looking to you, the listener of this, to be mindful of. They're going to work hard, but you need to cut them some slack. You need to cut them some slack, and that is
I've
give
been
them the
told that by
flexibility.
3 daughters.
Have you?
By my 3 daughters.
So why do I even take the time? What I would throw out to you is these generational differences that I've described here it's really designed to kind of just be mindful of is that the folks that you have in your workforce represent diverse generations. And sometimes when people hear this term diversity, they automatically think, well, that's a race issue or that is a gender issue. The answer is yes, it is those, but it also diversity is a generational issue. And what oftentimes happens in the world out there is the bosses are of the older generation. And they tend to look at the generations coming in as being something different, maybe something less. And what I hope you're hearing and will continue to reinforce is there's some really redeeming qualities of each and every generation. And simply because a person was born within a particular time period, it doesn't necessarily mean that they exhibit all of these qualities. But like anything else, when you recognize that you have differences amongst your workforce and you are sensitive to those differences and you are paying attention to those differences, that sense of awareness will pay off in spades. And so that's the reason why we kind of chose managing across generations as one of our weekly themes. And that is we all can identify with it. But what oftentimes happens is when you see these graphs, you spend all your time looking at your own generation and nodding. And what I'm hoping to encourage you to do is that if you go back and watch this, Winter's created some great graphics here, is that would kind of explain a little bit in a way that the more you know about these other generations, the more willingness you are to modify your leadership and your communication style in consideration. So that second point that I would hope to bring up is that we're strongly encouraging you as business owners, as leaders, anything you can do to foster communication and collaboration. And be mindful of that should cross generational boundaries. There's a natural tendency. People stick together.
Let me ask you that though. So that resonates less with me, right?
All
So,
right.
the generation Gen X, which we come from, we're more individualist, right? I've had a conversation with a millennial before that reported to me 2 levels below me. And he was coaching or schooling me on how I needed to view the world a certain way, right? And be, more inclusive and focus on these other things. And I quickly reminded him, okay, great. Now that I know your generation, let me help you understand my generation. I focus on results.
Mm-hmm.
And I want you to go do your job and get things done. So it was an interesting conversation.
The fact that this person even was willing to bring that up, that kind of shows you there's a boldness sometimes in saying, this is who are and what I kind of believe. Now, let me make sure I'm not glossing over this. Ken, as a COO, you should expect results.
Yeah.
Okay. I'm not in any way diminishing results. For most organizations, results are in the form of profitability.
Yeah. Yeah.
What are you doing individually? What is your area of responsibility doing collectively to move that number? So I in no way suggest that we back off from results expectations.
Yeah. And I'm not implying that you're saying that.
Okay. What I would like to say, though, is that awareness of how these generations might be looking at the world a bit differently can pay off.
Right.
We'll talk about it's a little bit more detail, but there's real value in formal or informal mentorships. Yeah. And I like to introduce something that people tend to forget. Mentorship normally is you're thinking of a boss of an older generation and someone of a younger generation. Companies who embrace mentorships have found that there's also value in the flip of that, reverse mentorships. And you kind of say, well, what does that mean? It means that if you're a boomer and you really didn't grow up around technology and you got folks on your staff who that just comes natural, why wouldn't you engage them, let them help you as a leader better understand, better embrace that by asking them to share that expertise, they feel heard. They feel that you've acknowledged them. So I'm just want to mention when you're thinking about mentorships, it can work both older generation mentoring a younger, and there's some real value if you think about flipping that. One thing I find too is when you kind of step back and say, you're trying to bring together a group of people and you're trying to solve problems every day. If you put in the room everybody who thinks the exact same way, then all you really get is one perspective.
Yeah. Yeah.
If you are open to bringing people, perhaps to include of different generations together, and you listen, they may have some ideas you wouldn't have thought about.
Yeah.
And so the data backs this up. I love Harvard Business Review. I think the things that they put out, it really tells in one sentence the whole story. But what they say is that if you are open to a diverse and inclusive team, you're going to make better decisions, more innovative decisions 87% of the time. The numbers bear it out.
Now, Mike, I'm curious, and I found this in my experience, but I think mentorship programs and everything are really great. And specifically, if you're a fast growing organization, even if you're not, but a fast growing organization, bringing in new blood continuously, right, to elevate. But one of the things that I've found that is absolutely critical to establishing a great mentoring program is those doing the mentoring need to want to do it and be a part of it, right? Because I've seen them go sideways where people are like, oh, Mike, congratulations, you're Winter's mentor. Right, great. I have enough things to do. The last thing I want to do is mentor Winter, but I guess it's another thing added on my plate. Where if you build the program around, hey, we're looking for people to be mentors. And by the way, here's what being a mentor means. And by the way, when we do your quarterly reviews and pay raises and everything, this is going to be reviewed positively. This is going to set you apart from others. So those that want to actually grow in an organization where management and leadership positions may not be immediately available can see this as a way to get their name in front of others and everything as well. So I have found, I'm curious in your opinion, that is a really critical element for a successful program though.
Yeah, I found that companies sometimes overthink mentoring. And what I would say is that it doesn't have to be formal, but if you are asking someone to mentor, they really not only need to want to mentor, but they need to know how to mentor.
I was going to say that too. You're spot on. Yeah.
So you need to kind of give them a sense of what that actually is. Here's what I have found, Ken, is that the people who are natural mentors, they tend to surface themselves. Now, I'm biased. I find that those who have a kind of a mentoring mindset oftentimes are going to make great leaders. And if you're looking at who are you going to begin investing in developing leadership within the organization, those folks who are good mentors means that they are paying attention. They're coming alongside the people they're mentoring. They're working to assure their success. Well, goodness gracious, that's leadership.
Yep.
And so one thing I am mindful of, and I'll just pick one more statistic that just kind of got flashed up on the screen, and that is when organizations offer mentoring, it really makes a huge difference in kind of how things are perceived. We've talked a little bit about these differences, but what we also need to be mindful of is if we as leaders are willing to adapt our leadership style based on our understanding of the different needs of each generation. This is not something you just sit around and talk about. This is something you really need to kind of spend some time thinking about. But what we hope you're hearing in this conversation is if you're willing to adapt your leadership to the people you're leading, it shows flexibility. It shows a willingness on your part to listen and to pay particular attention to things that matter most. If you're willing to back that up by making sure that you're developing the folks irrespective of where they are in each generation. We have a tendency to put all of our training and development in the people who are just kind of coming along. There are ways that people can learn and grow regardless of the generation. What
I'm kind of hearing from you, Mike, it's, the marketing department, they invest in marketing to this segment, that segment, right? And they can run several campaigns based on the demographics that they're trying to target and hit. And if the business owners and CEOs did more of that in how they led their employees, just like a successful marketing campaign turns into a lot of revenue, a successful way of doing that with your employees could turn into a lot of goodwill and camaraderie and culture around the office and make everybody, including the owner, happy and the employees more willing to want to step up and take charge so that the owner can get more of that balance and freedom we talked about in the beginning. I mean, is that kind of what I'm hearing?
You're hearing it. It's a consistent theme. The last session, if you've not listened or watched it, I'd encourage you to go back to do so. In that last session, we put particular emphasis on why do we as company owners put a lot of money in marketing, positioning our brand as a company, but we tend to overlook how are we as an employer. And one of the things I can't stress enough is investing in your employees, generation after generation. It doesn't matter. They value your willingness to invest in them. And this next point I'd like to kind of bring up is
just real quick, Mike,
please.
As you continue through this, and I'm curious on your thoughts on this as well. So my opinion, first of all, to be any manager and or employee, first of all, if you're just an employee, then not as important, but you need to know how to communicate across the organization to drive results. You got to know how to communicate down, which is a lot what we're speaking towards, right?
Mm-hmm.
But the most important thing is you actually have to lead and communicate up as well. So this whole dynamics of generations and leadership are important, but it's also very important for those that are being led to understand those above you as well and where they come from, because it's just important to manage your boss as it is your employees at times, to manage expectations, that keep things on track, to make sure that that they understand the results that you're driving and things of that nature. What are your thoughts on that?
I hadn't thought about that until you just mentioned this, but I am familiar with organizations that they tend to churn. And what they do is when a person has been with the organization X amount of time, I see this particularly in educational systems. You hit 30 years, they basically are kicking you out. And people with 30 years still have a lot to contribute, but they literally look around and they feel that they have been kind of pushed out of the organization. I think that's a travesty. I really do. But it can work the exact opposite. I think, Ken, you and I know, and that I think we actually share a client that the people you're bringing in might be more of the younger generation. We've got to be careful that doesn't apply in that setting. That if you've got folks who are of older generation, we need to be actively including them. If things slip out of your mouth about we're bringing in young talent, the message to the older employees is, you know what, they don't really value me and I have a lot to offer. So you got to be kind of careful. But at the end of the day, the slide that we're looking at right now is when I step back and kind of look at what is the essence of what I do when I'm working with companies, I'm trying to instill in individuals and in companies respect. If you will show respect to your employees, just show it in real ways, you get it back in spades. How do you do that? You want to foster a culture that values and respects all the generations. And if you can, encourage that teamwork such that you are purposely bridging those generation differences. I'll give an example. Let's say you've got project kind of comes on and the natural tendency would be put certain people together to go work on that project. What if you stop and say, how do we make sure that that team has multiple generations? How do we make sure that team has different skill sets? How do we make sure is that when you diversify how people work together and they get things done, they can build rapport, and you're going to end up having better results. So as you kind of step back and you kind of look at it, what we have a tendency to do also is be mindful. Some generations, particularly younger generations, gosh, they grew up getting recognized for just showing up.
Yeah.
You know, and what's interesting, they showed up, got a medal, and they come to work and they expect us to give them medals. Well, we're not that good at giving medals for just showing up. But whatever you do, when you recognize individuals, be mindful of kind of how do they want to be recognized. As a general rule, those who are in the younger generations, they expect more feedback, and you need to be mindful of that. They're hungry for that because they were raised that way. And what I would also say is that as business owners, as leaders, sometimes we have our nose so to the grindstone. It's drive, always looking for the next thing. My encouragement is don't forget to acknowledge when milestones are reached. Genuinely show appreciation. Gallup, boy, I love their surveys, but they found that nearly 80% of the employees who quit their jobs quit for one reason. They don't feel appreciated. They don't feel valued. They weren't recognized for the contribution. And what do? They feel they need to go someplace else to get it.
Yeah.
Take the time.
What's interesting there also, some best practices that I've implemented over the years is don't assume that you know what appreciation means. And I know that sounds silly, but wherever I went when I wasn't a fractional person or full-time, if you will, I would introduce this thing called best of the best. And I'd have people on my team in a variety of positions, and I would get together with them on a quarterly basis. And that could be sales support, systems engineers, because I came out of software and high tech per se, and get their input and then work on problems to help the team. And I remember multiple times I would ask people, so, the last large team I managed at Oracle, I asked them, how do you want to be recognized, right? And some people think, oh, just throw them money, or I'll send them a trophy, or, this little award or whatever. I asked them, and I was stunned, but literally the top performers on our team, and I was several levels up, said, Ken, I would love it end of quarter if I'm an all-star on your team. I'd love an email from you. That's it. Doesn't take a lot of time or money, So I implemented that. It's like the top 15 people in the quarter, every quarter, I just shoot them a personal email and copy their manager and thank them. But I think it's important to understand how the generations want recognized and how the individuals on your team want recognized, and make sure that you're feeding that per se is my key point.
Ken, I love this idea of best of the best. You're assembling people who exemplify that, and in doing so, you're modeling, this is what I'm looking for. This is the behavior I'm looking for. And so people can say, you know what? I want to be invited to be part of that list. And they start paying attention to the people who are on, who are invited to that. And hopefully they aspire to do the same. Can we go back?
Real quick,
go ahead.
Here's the powerful part of that if you utilize it. So with cancerous employees, or those naysayers, or those C-level employees, I would never go back and report on it. I would actually, during a quarterly discussion, I would actually invite their peers that were a part of it. And they would discuss, here are the things that we talked about, right? Here are the type of individuals that we like to work with, right? Here are the results that we as a team want. Here are the things that we're working with Ken on. So it didn't feel like Ken is for, it felt like, wow, my peers are doing this, right? And if they were not on board with that, then they were a bit of an outsider, and it helps separate some of those bad employees as well.
Yeah, I love, as I'm listening to what you're describing, another thing I like about what you just mentioned as a possible leadership technique by assembling that group, as a key leader, you've got strategic goals that you're trying to achieve as a business.
Yeah.
But oftentimes, the further down you go in the organization, you lose sight of what that is. And what you particularly lose sight is, how can I contribute towards that?
Yeah.
And if you, in your work with that team, they gain clarity of what is it we're working on? How can we work together to see that happens? And what they do is go back to their respective areas and they
they carry the
share
flag.
that. You begin cascading that message into the organization, and you get real specific as to what is it you're looking for. This is a sidebar, but I think it's something we ought to just take a moment. And that is, you mentioned about those, all they asked for was an email. What I would like to say is, if you're going to recognize someone, be specific. Don't just, hey, thank you for being on the team, you did a good job. The more specific you can be to, you made a difference by doing the following things, they better understand, oh, so that's what Ken's looking for.
Yeah.
That's what the company's looking for. And so anything you can do to personalize, and in personalizing, what you may find is that what you write as a recognition of a person of one generation might be slightly different, because you better understand what's important to them. So, all right, good points. The slide that we're showing right now is this notion of generational gap. And I've heard it described as, you kind of have this V if you're kind of looking at that. What are generational gaps? I think we all have examples of where we've kind of experienced that. But one thing that we have to be mindful of, if you have a workforce that representative of multiple generations, probably not 5, but maybe 4, most definitely 3 in your workforce, this conversation we're having right now, it needs to take place in your workplace. It may be that what you want to do is offer training on those generational differences. I found this kind of interesting. I was asked to speak to my Rotary Club, and I said, what do you want me to talk about? I could talk about a variety of things. And they said, can you speak to generational differences? And I said, well, okay. Well, it was incredible. This room full of Rotarians, 100 plus, when I began this conversation, I got away from the podium and we just began walking around the room. Nobody ever did that before, is that they kind of leaned in. And I found out that this is a topic that everybody, even retirees, were interested in. And what I tried to do is make that presentation engaging, something they can actually work with. I hope what people are listening to right now will find the same, but you have to be willing to train.
Why is
Yeah,
it why is it important now? I'll be honest. When I started in the workforce, it wasn't important. I had a boss. I did what the boss said. I did my job. Right? So why is it important now? What's driving that, out of curiosity?
I think what's driving that in short is employees are looking to us to provide things beyond just a paycheck.
Yeah.
And in today's economic climate, if they've got their acting gear, they're highly marketable. And if they are at someplace and it doesn't appear that they're valued by their boss, or the peers don't respect them, they've got choices. So why is it important? This is part of going back to providing a workplace that people want to work for. You want employees to be recruiting your next employees, the good employees in particular. So why is it important? It's something that we tend to gloss over because most folks don't really understand these differences.
Yeah.
And just being willing to understand not only generational differences, and I said this before, but to understand that we're all wired differently. And it could be extroverts versus introverts.
Yeah.
It could be as simple as that, is that when we are attuned to the differences of the people who we lead, and we tailor our interactions with them with that sense of awareness, that is interpreted as, my boss understands me. He may not be of my generation. You know what? We're not that alike, but you know what? He pays attention to the things that matter most to me, and I value that. And when you step back and look at it, that's
I
what
think
really
you-
differentiates.
Yeah, I'm sorry. I think too that just acknowledgement doesn't necessarily mean agreement. You don't have to agree with the generations. You don't have to do things the way they do, but just acknowledging that that's how they do it. It's going to ultimately, look, it's that old saying, right? If you give them what they want, you get what you want. And so as a leader, as a CEO, as a business owner, if you are giving your employees, your staff, your people force what they need, then you are going to get more productivity out of them just simply by understanding. You don't have to agree.
We've talked about the traditionalists and baby boomers, but we also be mindful of what are they accustomed to? The traditionalists, they were born before 1946. What was going on in 1946 in the United States? We had a world war. Okay. And we mobilized. The military played a pivotal role. How does the military typically operate? It's command and control. You've got a boss. If the boss says you do something, you don't question it, you do it. Why? Out of necessity. Because if you're on the battlefield, there's no room to question the boss. Well, they went into the workforce, and they're used to saluting whatever the boss would say. As those next generations came along, that's not the case. If you are still leading your company with the mindset, this is the military, I am the boss, you do what I say, some folks, they'll stick with it because they need the job. But the really talented folks are going to say, I don't need this. We've been sharing statistics. We've been sharing a number of things. I think maybe this is a good time for us just to kind of go a little bit more free form. What questions have surfaced? What things would y'all like us to kind of explore a little bit now?
I'm curious on your thoughts on COVID and how that impact generations. And for example, and what I mean by that, there used to be the old saying that people don't leave companies, they leave managers. However, and generally in any report you see in the past, you would see managers number one, not provided or reason why I stay, upward mobility and or given the right tools and systems, and or feedback, and money was always generally 4 or 5, but for the first time ever during COVID, money became number one. Number one, people were leaving purely because of money, not because of those other things. And I'm curious, how COVID and money impacted those generations and their outlook in engagement differently, if you have any thoughts on that.
I'll try to speak to the generational differences, but let's just speak about COVID in general. Why was money important? Because we were in an uncertain environment. We didn't know what was going to happen. And when you are dealing with the things that we were dealing in the world, we're looking for assurances.
Yeah,
we're looking for guarantees. And that's probably one reason why money became very, very important. What we found is working from home has lots of appeal. It offers the flexibility that folks like, but here's what it also resulted in. The sense of camaraderie was oftentimes lost. A Zoom call is not the same as being in person.
yeah.
When you are in person, what's happening? You're in meetings face to face. You can pick up on all those clues, but also you're interacting with folks in the break room, in the hallway, before work, after work. There's so much more that goes into kind of the sticking power. What I'm seeing right now, Ken, is that companies, particularly large companies, are struggling with what are we going to do about this work from home? Some of the larger companies have said, you know what, it's not working, and they're mandating return to work.
Yeah, or take pay cuts and work at home.
Yes.
Yeah.
And so they kind of quantify, and what companies are saying is, all right, there's an interesting aspect of this, and we haven't talked about this up to this point, and that is for companies that have a hybrid approach. It appeals to those who want to work from home. It appeals for those who go to the office, but you might ask, why would they want to go to the office? something that we tend to forget is out of sight, out of mind. As leaders, if we have someone we're working side by side in person, we can see firsthand what they're doing throughout the day. If we have folks who are working from home, we don't see that.
Yeah.
And so those people who aspire to grow with the company, they're feeling that if they don't come back to the office, I'm going to be overlooked.
You know, it's interesting. I come at this with a very different perspective, I think, than most. And because I came out of software and high tech, right? Literally 95% of my career has been remote. Literally, right? And my boss would be in California, my team spread out across North America or even internationally. And, you know, and I guess I never needed that, right? But then I'm Gen X and I'm more of an individualist, right? And but I never had a problem with it. And my boss would look at the numbers, and if the numbers were the numbers, and you know, great, just doing his job. So it's really interesting, but I know that it impacted a lot of others a great deal.
I think you're probably the exception, Ken. And a lot of people can't say that. But I know you, Ken, and you're somewhat self-directed. Just tell me what I need to do and I'll go get it done. When you're leading others, you probably have the same expectation. Let me be real clear on what needs to happen. If you go do this, I'm happy. Holler if you need me. But what I would just throw out to you is we're talking about right now, these generational differences, is that we just need to be mindful of their needs might vary.
Yeah.
And so what I hope, I know we've gotten a little bit off on remote work or hybrid work, but I would probably venture to say those who are most comfortable working from home are of the younger generation. And it'd be interesting if you step back and when you give them a choice, but that would be the case too. Be mindful of what you're making available to them. And if you do give your employees that option to work from home, don't exclude bringing them together periodically to do the things that build cohesion, builds camaraderie, builds a sense of teamwork. There's really no substitute for that being done in person. So I guess what I would throw out to you is certain generations need that more than others, and be mindful of that as you're making decisions, how to be involving everybody as much as possible. A couple of the points that I would like to share with you, and as we kind of touched on this a little bit earlier, and that is when you're thinking about managing a multi-generational workforce, we talked a bit about mentoring, but what we need to be mindful of, why should you mentor? Yes, it does build cohesion, but it also, done right, is you're investing in the next generation. The people who are going to come in and be leading your organization, you need to be intentional. And if you have a mentoring program, even an informal mentoring program, it's a great way to make sure that information gets shared across generations. It also can help kind of provide that succession pipeline that organizations oftentimes just don't pay enough attention to that. What's being showed right now is some statistics. One of them was from the American Society for Training and Development. And this was surveying Fortune 500 companies, but it probably applies regardless of the size, is that 71% of those companies that have mentoring programs, they find incredible value on knowledge transfer and skill development. And we have to be mindful of people want to feel like they're learning and growing in the organization. So admittedly, I'm a bit biased. I'm a strong advocate for investing in your people through training. My niche primarily is people skills training. And that's my niche because most companies suck at that. They focus on the technical aspects. I help focus on the people skills training because that is what oftentimes derails supervisors. And those supervisors get promoted, and it can derail careers if you're not paying attention to the people skills. Knowing generational differences is one of those people skills I'm making reference to. And the Center for Creative Leadership That's really a remarkable organization. But what they found is that when companies take the time to have well-defined succession plans, you're going to improve morale, you're going to improve engagement. But what you're really going to do is you're going to drive down turnover. Why? Because you're intentional. You are being very purposeful in developing your folks. You're creating career paths. You are offering succession plans. And if you don't have that, people just assume you don't, though you might. You may already have on a piece of paper all of the plans, but if that's not known in the organization, they assume it doesn't exist.
And I think that, if you're listening to this, you might think this is not that important of a point, or I don't need to implement this in my company. But when we're talking about, this entire series being about attracting and retaining, this retention part is what I think a lot of owners have not put enough energy or effort into. And if they're going, well, I just don't understand why I'm having to, so much turnover. If you do one of these or two of these, aren't you going to be way ahead of some of the other leaders out there?
No question on my part. It's hard to find good people. Why do we put all our emphasis in finding the good people? Why wouldn't we put some emphasis on retaining those good employees we already have? But if you're going to retain them, you've got to do the things that we've been talking about over the last couple of weeks. You need to be mindful that these employees expect respect, not only from you, but from their peers. These same employees need to feel that they have a voice, that you see them as individuals. You recognize that they may even come from a different generation, and their needs as a generation might be different from others. But when you pay attention to things we're talking about, I'm biased, but I'm a strong opinion. When you pay attention to these kinds of things, what you're going to find is employee engagement. People who come to work really excited about being there, it goes up. And what goes down is turnover, costly turnover. When someone leaves the company that you don't want to leave, it costs you not only in bucks, but in so many other different ways. So hopefully what you're going to find over the course of these 4 weeks is this is all part of making sure your employees feel valued, that you show respect, you recognize differences, including those generational differences, and that you as a leader are willing to invest in your employees, give them the training, develop them, give them a sense of where they can learn and grow, and a sense of what might be next for them. If you can give them that sense, why would they leave?
Mm-hmm. Awesome.
I don't know if I can, I don't know if I need to elaborate anymore unless you have some other questions here.
Okay.
But just Mike, for those listening out here, what would you say, where could they start today? Right? What would be their core takeaways, some key things that they can take back to their companies and start? What are some simple things to start working on today?
Well, if we stuck with just what we've talked about today, is go back and read the slides that will be provided to you, and not because it's a lot of data, but read it with the intent of, when you read through this and you read through different generations, think about people on your team, in your company who fit that. So make it personal. Put a name and a face with each of those generational differences and use that to kind of test. Does that describe this employee? Does that describe this employee? And in understanding those differences, you have to be willing. What's the main takeaway? Be willing to adapt to the circumstance. Being willing to adapt starts with being aware that there are potential differences. So what is the main thing I would say? Go back, read through this, not just for knowledge's sake, but read through it as a leader. Think about individuals in your organizations and think about how might you change how you interact with those employees based on what you have heard and have read. And if you're willing to make those adjustments, I can assure you, it's going to pay off in spades. They're going to work harder for you. You're going to see better outcomes. They're going to take better care of your customers. And when you take better care of your customers, what are you going to have? you're going to have a more successful business, a more profitable business. And that's kind of what I hope people have heard. When you do these things, it will have a bottom line impact.
Yep. Okay, awesome.
I mean, like I said, when we originally discussed your outline, this one is incredibly interesting to me, because when I started shifting how, so if I went on an appointment with a baby boomer, I would bring a stack of paperwork and I would hand it to him and go over to, but then if I'm going on an appointment with millennial, I'd bring my iPad and I'd flip, you know, and just the littlest shifts, you know, really did help. So I think this could go way beyond employees. And this is something we should probably spend a lot more time talking about. So the Shift Spot is super excited to have you for another 2 weeks. We're going to be finishing up a lot of these amazing topics all around people issues, people problems, and all the things that business owners deal with when you have employees. And so this is an example of an expert coaching event. That's one of the several things that our Shift Spot membership does offer. We are super excited to have Mike as our expert. We focus on the core areas that leaders tend to have issues in: leadership, people, sales and marketing, finance, process and systems, and then also that balance piece. So moving forward for next week, we are going to be talking about change leadership for CEOs and business owners. Mike, do you want to give us a little bit about what we're going to be talking about next week on the 23rd at 11 p.m. EST?
In short, change happens. How do you as a leader embrace it so that when change takes place, you get the results you're looking for?
Awesome. I mean, this is going to be a good one too. So thank you guys, everyone, for coming today. We really appreciate it. And we will see you next time.
Awesome. Thanks all. Appreciate it.
Thanks.